A very special good evening to you. It's Wednesday night. I know you're hearing the theme and you're looking at a montage and you're thinking, is this Monday night? No, it's not. It's the correct day of the week. It's Wednesday. But we have been requested to do a special edition of Beyond the Headlines in light of today's budget presentation. This evening, we have a distinguished panel. We always do, but we're so happy to have this combination tonight. We have two former finance ministers in the House, Mr. Anthony Boatswain, who is now the chairman of the New National Party. He's representing the government this evening. Former finance minister in the NDC government, Mr. Nazim Burke. And we have economist Lennox who worked as permanent secretary in the Ministry of Finance for several years. He's an economist. We had him on Monday night, and we are happy to have him back. Gentlemen, it's good to have you with us this evening. All right, so the ground rule is everybody remember to unmute your microphones when you need to speak so that we don't have to repeat ourselves throughout the program. So first off, the finance minister made a presentation in Parliament today, and we will be assisted this evening, guided by some of the excerpts that we have tried to pull together. So let's first look at the quantum of the budget, which is slide number 1. And the finance minister did present another $1 billion budget, and he has highlighted some of the figures, with recurrent revenue being $653.5 million, grants expected to be at 263, the current expenditure $629, capital expenditure $305 million, the current account surplus we're looking at $23.9 million there. The principal repayments, $297. The primary surplus after grants, $45.5 million. The overall deficit after grants, $18.2 million. So I'll start with Mr. Anthony Boatswain. He's good at crunching numbers, an economist. Mr. Boatswain, you want to take us through some of those numbers and bring it into bite size so that the public could understand what's going on there?
Yes, and first of all, let me say good evening to the listening and viewing public. Let me also say good evening to my colleague panelists. I am really pleased to have two gentlemen that I have worked with in the past. Brother Nazim Burke, we went way back in the Ministry of Finance during the days of the revolution when he was PS in trade, and I was in finance, and Brother Lennox Andrew, who served as my permanent secretary in the Ministry of Finance when I was the Minister of Finance. Well, first of all, let me extend congratulations to the Minister for Finance, the newly appointed Minister of Finance, Brother Gregory Bowen, on his maiden budget presentation. I thought that he presented an excellent budget. It's a budget of hope. There was a lot to look forward to in this budget, notwithstanding the difficult circumstances under which we now exist with this COVID-19 pandemic. And to present a budget of this magnitude, $1.2 billion, slightly higher than the 2020 budget, speaks volume with regards to the competence of this administration to manage the finances of our country. With regards to the figures, as you rightly said, the budget is being circumscribed by what I consider the significant reduction in current revenue for this year. And when we look at the figures compared to last year, you will see that where we had significant surpluses, now we have marginal surplus. And where we had an overall surplus last budget, now we have a small deficit. Again, because of the $132 million reduction in revenue, we have those new variables. And therefore, I believe that the budget is commendable, still commendable. It still provides the focus for the government to push forward with its program of growth and employment creation by putting a lot of emphasis on the key areas that will stimulate growth in the economy, namely agriculture and the public sector investment program And in particular, we are looking at infrastructure development. So overall, as I said, it's a very good budget given the present circumstances. But as every budget, the substance or the success will depend on the implementation of what we see on paper.
All right, so thank you so much, Mr. Boatswain, for those opening comments. And I want to go to Economist, Mr. Lennox Andrews. Mr. Andrews, I'm certain with the limited time that you would have had to crunch some numbers, what are your thoughts overall?
Thank you very much, Mrs. Campbell, and a very pleasant good evening to my fellow panelists and to the listening public. Let me begin, first of all, by recognizing the presence of Minister Boatswain as my chief, I should say, my immediate boss. When I joined the Ministry of Finance many years ago as a young economist, I had to report to him directly. And when I became Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Finance, I had to report to him directly. And I want to take this opportunity to say to him thanks for the exposure, thanks for the role he played in my academic and in my professional
Mr. Andrews, I will charge you for that. I will charge you. You should have told him that a long time ago. Let's get to the numbers.
Yeah. So, but be that as it may, I had some time to look at the estimates of revenue and expenditure. I didn't have sufficient time to go through the budget speech. So my comments tonight will be more of a technical nature. Yeah? More of a technical nature as against of a political nature. And therefore, when I analyze the budget, I observe that there are a few things that should have been done to concretize it and to make it complete. As I indicated earlier, that over the last 5-10 years or so, we have been presenting budgets that are incomplete and unbalanced. And again, this year, when I look at the estimates, we also have an unbalanced and incomplete budget because we did not address a fundamental part of the budget, which is the financing. How you're going to finance your overall deficit that you have in the budget this year? How you're going to get rid of that overall deficit? Good. So that's the very first point that I want to make about the budget. Secondly, when I observe the numbers in the budget, I see that the budget in itself, while it tends to want to focus on growth, the numbers that I see for growth are very, very high indeed. And I am wondering how realistic and the ability of the government to implement a budget of that magnitude in this period. And I think Mr. Boatswain ended his opening comments quite right by saying that the numbers are there, but in the final analysis, what is important is the implementation. And I hope I will get some time to speak about the absorptive capacity, the extent to which I think that budget can be implemented so as to achieve the growth rate that reference is being made to.
All right. Okay. So I'm certain we'll get to that. We want to get to the allocations, but before we do that, we want to ask the former finance minister in the NC government, Mr. Nazim Burke, for his thoughts overall on the budgetary package as outlined today. Mr. Burke.
Thank you very much, Odette, and good evening to you. Good evening to all of your viewers and listeners. I also want to say good evening to the members of the panel. And I want to start by commending the minister on the presentation of his maiden budget. He was clearly highly motivated. It was quite spirited. But I must tell you quite frankly that in my mind, it was, in a manner of speaking, a very ordinary budget in very extraordinary times. I saw nothing really in the budget that struck me as new or innovative, having regard to the times and the circumstances in which we are living. I have not had much time to look at the documentation myself. I saw the statement after 6 o'clock, 6:30 or so this afternoon for the first time. Of course, it was only presented today, and I got a copy of the estimates this afternoon as well. But I want to say that I consider this to be a routine budget. You know, it addressed the same things that would have been addressed whether COVID was there or not. The BNTF, the St. John's River Flood Control Project, the St. Patrick's projects, refurbishing of government buildings, you know, the agricultural feeder roads programs, all of the standard things, the Imani program, all of the standard things that were in the budget last year, were in the budget the year before. And I did not get a sense that we were really tackling a crisis. And that is what I felt was absent in the budget. Right, the numbers speak to the crisis. The reaction, the response did not seem to the crisis itself. You know, we live in COVID times. It has changed the world. It came at a time when our planet was already facing an existential crisis, the climate crisis. And the intersection of these two developments, as I've said before, really means a lot for the world. And what we do and how we do it would make a huge difference in the way things are done. I believe that the challenge facing the government is how to stimulate economic growth, how to stimulate, to boost employment, how to reduce vulnerability. And by vulnerability here, I'm talking about health vulnerability, given the crisis, some of the vulnerabilities associated with the natural disasters, as well as the vulnerabilities in incomes and income support situations. How to strike that balance between boosting the economy, boosting employment, reducing vulnerability, but maintaining some kind of social balance that will ensure that some of our people do not fall through the cracks, the dispossessed do not descend into abject poverty, the middle income people do not suffer, and overall, we can go forward in a balanced way. That is really what is required. But doing so requires more than just repeating the same budgets and doing the same things.
Right, so
and I believe that in this particular situation, more could have been done.
If I could interject here, sir. So thanks for those opening thoughts. Because time slips by quickly, I want us to try and zeroing on a couple of things. So we'll move on to where we look at the allocations. So I'll ask the producer to assist us with that. We want to look at the various allocations made to the various government departments. And as announced today by the Minister for Finance, the Ministry of Infrastructure Development, Transport and Implementation, they're in the number one spot, 133.7 million. And we'll run through the others quickly before we come back to the panel. So let's go to the other slide, where we then see the Ministry of Education, then Finance, Health, National Security, Housing, Tourism, Agriculture at number 9, Sports at number 10. Minister Boatswain, what's the thinking here?
Great. Just to respond to my colleague, brother Naz.
But wait, hold on, Mr. Boatswain.
Yes, because we have to put this thing in perspective, yeah?
A lot of political semantics.
Is really
but I would like for us to deal with the numbers because...
Yes, but please, let me put it in perspective. Then we could look at the number. We cannot look at numbers without putting it in perspective. Okay. The budget is a balance between social imperatives, that is a need to provide the necessary support for the poor and vulnerable, and at the same time, the critical importance of ensuring that we focus on the sectors that would drive economic growth and employment. And hence the reason why you see the allocations as they are. You will see great emphasis being placed on two critical areas, agriculture and infrastructure development within the framework of a more robust public sector investment program. When you look at the budget itself, and you look at the allocation for agriculture, and you see $18.6 million, you say, well, hey, this is the same as last year. But this might be a misconception of facts, because what you see there is just the allocation within the ministry itself. the total allocation for agriculture, the total capital allocation for agriculture is way in excess of $40 million. When you look at the various projects to be undertaken to facilitate agricultural development, but are placed under different ministries. When you look at the farm road, for example, you're not seeing farm road reflected in this $18.5 million, yeah? You're not seeing SIAP's contribution being reflected there. You're not seeing government contribution by way of farm support reflected there. So overall, do not look at this $18.6 million as the capital investment for agriculture. And understanding also that agriculture is 99% private sector driven, and therefore it is the role of the government to facilitate agricultural production and to stimulate agricultural production, not to get involved in agricultural production itself. So when some people say, I am not seeing enough for agriculture, you have to identify the strategic areas of intervention where you feel that government should get more involved. And I'm hearing we're not putting enough, but I'm not hearing from the people exactly what are the strategic areas. And therefore, agriculture, I see, is heavily focused upon in this budget. The public sector investment program, which again is the main driver of economic growth and development, as both Naz and Toad will know, that there is a functional relationship between investment and growth. And that is prescribed by a matrix that we call the incremental capital output ratio. The more you invest, the more growth you will get. So obviously,
so Mr. Boatswain, can I ask you to
in a time when the external sector, when tourism...
Mr. Boatswain, can I ask you to just pause for 5 seconds? And it's imperative that we kind of steer things in a particular direction in interest of time. So we're looking at the numbers. You're saying that the 18.5 million should not be looked at, but that is what was presented. So for instance, that's what... No, sorry. I'm not saying it should not be looked at. I think you get me wrong. I am saying that is what you get under the Ministry of Agriculture, but there are projects. Right.
The agricultural project, like this, you will not see the farm road project in that $18 million. You will not see SIAP's contribution in that $18 million. That's the point I'm making. So do not look at the 18 million as the capital allocation for agriculture. That's the point I'm making.
Thanks. So let me go to the economist on the panel. Mr. Andrews, so we noticed that 1.5% of total expenditure is allocated for agriculture throughout the post-COVID period. Are we saying post, meaning from March until now? On the GBN programs, we have been hearing, if nothing else, there's need for investment in agriculture because we need to improve our food security. Do you think enough is being allocated in the budget for agriculture? Yeah, and Mr. Andrews, Lord, I don't want to say it again. Unmute your mic. Unmute.
No. Not enough has been allocated for agriculture.
Right.
I mean, COVID has given us a clear direction as to where we should go with our economy. Yeah? And COVID made it clear that we have to increase our domestic production to satisfy domestic consumption in a special period like this. And to the extent that COVID is going to be around for a while, we cannot cease to pay greater focus on domestic production, agriculture, and its related sectors, agro-processing, livestock, and so on, to be able to have sufficient domestic production for domestic consumption, just in case another lockdown is to come across. Now, when I look at the abstract of capital expenditure, the amount that I see there for capital on agriculture is only 6 million. It's only 6 million. Compare that with 140-something million that is being placed on infrastructure. Good? The infrastructure. Now, so that tells me that the focus or the priorities of the government are not in keeping with what, in fact, the people are looking at. I would have thought that, given what happened in COVID, two things should have been important in particular. One, that we have to fix our borders. We have to concentrate on our health, make sure the population remains healthy. So we have to fix our borders, fix the quarantine, so as to ensure that whosoever comes into the country comes in free of this disease. So our people could feel free and they could feel relaxed so that they can go out and work. As long as the threat remains in people's mind, they would not be able to apply themselves to work as they would like to.
Right.
So I would have liked to see more being placed in the area of health and in the protection of our borders, so as to free up our minds as our local people, right? And then, of course, far more has to be put in agriculture for a number of reasons.
Right.
To solve the unemployment problem.
So let me ask you to just
generate and to save on foreign exchange. Yeah?
Mr. Andrews, let me just ask you to stick up in there, because I know we belabored that point on Monday night. Mr. Burke, you've looked at the numbers and the allocations, and there has been a lot of complaints about probably insufficient emphasis being placed on agriculture. Are you happy with the allocations that you have seen here? And Mr. Andrews has been talking about health, which is at number 4 with 7.7% of the total. But overall, your thoughts on the various allocations? And I think
I share the sentiment that was just expressed by Mr. Andrew, that the allocation for agriculture is inadequate. I do not accept Mr. Boatswain's suggestion that, you know, even though it is only 18 million, in fact, what is being spent is 40 million. I saw those numbers in the statement that was presented. Even if we were to take it as a fact that 40 million is being allocated in agriculture, it is still inadequate. It is not an answer to say, you know, look, the combined current expenditure and capital expenditure is $930 million. $930 million, capital plus recurrent. And if you're going to spend $930 million as a government, and you say that agriculture is your priority, then you ought to commit more money to agriculture if you genuinely believe that food security and nutrition security is important. You know, I looked at the recent cabinet reshuffling. We say that agriculture is a central ministry. You have a ministry like tourism and climate resilience. Tourism is important, climate resilience is important, but you have 2 ministers assigned to that ministry. In the case of agriculture, you have 2 ministers assigned to the Ministry of Health. In the case of agriculture, you have 1 minister assigned to the Ministry of Health. Now, I'm not saying that, I'm not questioning the competence of that minister. I'm simply saying, because of the importance that you attach to health, you put the numbers there, you put the support, the human resource and the leadership there to make it happen. If you feel the same way about, and you're doing the same for tourism and climate resilience, if you feel the same way about agriculture, then perhaps you need to tell yourself that you need stronger leadership. You need 2 people perhaps working instead of 1. It's all signals how the government genuinely sees agriculture. And I believe that just to answer the question by simply saying that, you know, agriculture is private sector and all that the government can do is support, is itself a defeatist attitude, because if you determine that agriculture is a strategic enterprise, a strategic economic activity, a strategic sector, then you have to determine at what level and in what ways the state is going to intervene. If, for example, you determine that nutmeg is a strategic product, you may decide you have to intervene to reorganize the market. If you determine that oil is a strategic product, the state is going to intervene. So the answer is, you're looking at the problem before behind, as they say in common parlance, to simply say it's a private sector problem. Whether it remains a private sector problem situation or not depends on the strategic significance that the state places on agriculture.
Right.
So I want to suggest here that that is a failing.
Thank you so much for that, Mr. Burke. Let's move on, and I'm going to ask the producer to take us along
Can I just correct the former minister?
Sure, go ahead.
I never said it was a private sector problem. I said it is private sector driven.
Sorry,
and government has a facilitating role to support the agricultural sector. There's no doubt. And again, let us not say that the allocation for agriculture is 1.5%. We have to be a little more open-minded and look at the other projects that contribute to agricultural production, and not just what you see under a ministry. The Farm Work Program, isn't that an agricultural initiative? The SIAP programs, aren't these agricultural initiatives? Let us be a little more pragmatic in our approach to dealing with this thing, and don't be don't have this fixation on a certain number that you see. Agriculture is the backbone of our country. It is imperative that this government do a lot to help our farmers to push forward. But the point is that the farmers own the assets, and government can only help them to move forward and to increase production and productivity in the sector. That's the point.
Right. So, Mr. Boatswain, for instance, I'm no expert, but I hear a lot of talk, and I was very young at the time, but we heard the People's Revolutionary Government, they got involved in driving a lot of agro-processing and that kind of thing. But I wouldn't stick on that point tonight. We want to move on. There are some comparisons that the government made today in the presentation, the Minister for Finance, and I'm going to ask the producer to assist us with that so we can quickly look at some of the comparisons. So he said by year end, the following results are expected relative to the approved budget. The current revenues, he's expecting 654 as compared to 786. There's going to be a shortfall of 132 million. Grants 114 as compared to the projection of 218. Taken together, the current revenues and grants underperforming by 236 million as a direct result of the pandemic. The expenditure 620 million compared to a budget of 633. Capital spending 122 compared to proposed 196, and a primary surplus of 82.2 compared to 246.2 million, and overall surplus of 26.6 compared to the targeted 170.6. So let me go to the economist on the panel. Mr. Andrews, you have seen those figures. Those are figures, not the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that we see here, but I'm saying those comparisons are figures that you would have, comparatives that you would have made when you were permanent secretary in the Ministry of Finance. What are your thoughts there? All right. So, Mr. Andrew, I'm skipping you and I'm going to the finance. I'm calling the finance minister. Sorry, Mr. Boatswain, that's in my head from reading news. Mr. Boatswain, what is the thinking there in terms of how is the government going to make up for that? Or I think Mr. Andrews has done the proper thing. Mr. Andrews, the next time, I think we're putting you out of the class.
As I said, we have to look at the budget within the context in which we now exist. The main issue, the primary problem is the significant reduction in revenue. And quite obviously, this government, we do not want to do as previous governments where you spend more than you earn. That is totally unacceptable in modern day fiscal management. And notwithstanding the situation, maybe one would have thought, well, government would try to spend in excess of the revenue you collect. But that is not good economic doctrine and it's not practice based on the fiscal responsibility laws that we passed, although they have to be suspended now. The point is that whatever we do, we must have subject to the availability of revenue.
Mr. Boatswain.
And those figures reflect a significant reduction in revenue.
All right, so Mr. Boatswain, let me ask, please. It sounds as if you've gone on to a defensive tangent. The question was not designed for that. The question I was asking is if you could take us through some of the numbers and speak to them. So there's no need for a defense
okay. All right, the fact is that I'm not seeing the numbers you're talking to, huh?
Oh, I thought you had.
I'm not seeing any of those numbers, so I cannot keep them in my head.
I thought you were conversant with the information that was presented.
No. You don't expect me to remember all of the numbers. That's why I'm giving you a synopsis of everything.
No, but so you don't see it on the screen. If you want me to go through
them one by one, then I have to look at them.
You're not monitoring the screen because we put it up on the screen.
The screen is not on. I am not seeing the screen.
Oh, okay. All right. My apologies, because what our guests normally do is they monitor on the online stream while they're looking so they can see what's being shown.
No, there's no such thing.
Okay, so let's see how we can fix that. Okay, so let me see if I can go past that. Producer, let's put it back up on the screen. So you are looking at shortfalls everywhere, and those include in your revenues and likewise in the expenditure. So you expect a primary surplus of 82.2 million compared to a projection of 246.2 million, an overall surplus of 26.6 million compared to a target of 170 million. So, Mr. Boatswain, if I could repeat those numbers for you. You have much less than you anticipated. So what I'm asking for you to do is to interpret that for the Grenadian public and not necessarily make a political defense.
This is because of your shortfall in revenue.
Right, good. Because of the shortfall in revenue. So what are the
if you have a $122 million shortfall in revenue, going forward, you must expect that, that will be reflected in the 2021 budget. You don't expect to collect more, right? So that shortfall must impact the current budget. And what I'm saying is that notwithstanding the shortfall, for prudent fiscal management, you have to ensure that you take measures to reduce inefficiencies in your expenditure, in your current expenditure. And that is what the budget is all about. How can we reduce inefficiencies in terms of spending and at the same time improve on efficiencies in collection of revenue? That is why this budget has no taxes, because we are depending on inefficiencies in both collection and removing those deficiencies in expenditure to give us the figures that here. But we cannot expect the figures you're looking at reflect the significant shortfall that we experience in terms of revenue collection.
All right, thank you so much. Mr. Andrews, if I could come to you and go through some of the numbers again. The current revenue, 654 as compared to 786. Grants, 114 million as compared to 218. Taken together, the current revenues grants underperforming by 236 million. So you, having sat in the Ministry of Finance, you were talking about the budget is not balanced. What is your take on that aspect of it? And that's on page 6, just it per adventure, you have the document.
My first question to you is what year you're looking at, 2020 or 2021? Because I'm not seeing
2021. So those are the projections for 2021, where you'd have those shortfalls because of the pandemic.
Right. Okay. So in 2021, you obviously either take measures to stabilize the economy or to try and have it recovered as quickly as possible. Yeah. It means therefore that there is a likelihood that you would not grow as quickly as you would have liked to. Good. So given what happened in 2020 and the sharp fall that would have taken place in 2020, yeah, you have to be very cautious in terms of how you proceed next year in terms of your growth targets and what you will do for those growth. Now, if the budget was properly done, if it was properly done in 2020, you would have been able to go to your financing and check to see whether or not you have any reserves, right, that you could have been used to cater for the shortfall that you had in 2020, right? But as I said before, the budget is always on balance. One of the things that you will observe when you have a balanced budget is that you will know if you have reserves or if you have unpaid claims inside that you could really attend to, if you have, but in particular reserves, if you have reserves that you could now draw down to use to cater for that shortfall in revenue. Now, in 2021, what you want to do is to try and halt that downfall in revenue you experienced the year before. Good. Now, to do so, the first thing you must do, what I said before, you must set a GDP growth rate, a likely GDP growth rate, and you're going to link your revenue performance to that level of economic activity you want to have to take place in 2021. Good. Now, in that regard, when I look at the numbers that you put for 2021, and in particular, I am looking at your capital budget, because your capital budget is the one that will allow for the growth to take place that you want to achieve. When I look at your capital budget, I am seeing a capital budget of $305 million in 1 year, 2021. Now, in my opinion, that capital budget is very ambitious. To me, I would say further, it is unrealistic, because never in the history of Grenada have we ever implemented a capital budget of such magnitude. In 2020, it was $100 121. In 2019, it was a lower figure. Good. So to put a budget of that magnitude in 2021 is really not following what happened in the past. So it's very ambitious. More than that, when you look at the capital budget, you observe, for example, that the financing of that capital budget, 80% of the financing of that capital budget is from external sources. So there's a high risk there. What would happen if those external sources don't become available? Chances are you won't be able to implement those capital budgets, and therefore the growth rate you're looking at wouldn't be achieved. Yeah. Secondly, you have to consider the rate of the implementation rate of your programs in the ministries. You have not been implementing capital budget 90%, 80%. Your implementation rate has always been 40 and 50%. Good. So your absorptive capacity doesn't allow for you to implement and to design a capital program of such magnitude in a very special year, a year in which the country is going through a special economic period. Right? So while I admit that effort must be made to at least stabilize and to grow, good, the numbers that you're putting there must be as realistic and highly possible. Otherwise, you're not taking this thing seriously.
All right. So, Mr. Burke, what is your thinking? What do you think was going through the government's mind when it decided to give the largest slice of the budgetary pie to the Ministry of Infrastructure Development? All right. So, Mr. Burke, you are on mute.
I am not quite sure that that is the case because I only had a chance to flip through the document this evening, but the statement of the allocations begins by saying, except for debt and something else, right? So you need to look to see what the debt allocations are. How much money is the government going to spend this year on repaying debts? Do not assume automatically that the greatest allocation is for infrastructure. It might be one of the greatest ones that were presented. There may well be 2 or 3 others that were not listed there based on the opening words of that sentence. I can't remember it now.
Okay, so while you make that point, okay, so we'll go on. We have a slide with public debt, but go ahead, make the point.
No, the reason I'm making the point is that, in fact, infrastructure may not be the largest. It is the largest of the ones that are listed there. That's the point I'm making.
All right. And if you were the Minister for Finance, why would that be?
I'm sorry?
So what is the thinking there, you think?
Well, that is going to be a very large number. I would not be surprised if that was in excess of 300 million. So, perhaps it does not look good to say that my biggest budgetary allocation is repaying debts just after I came out of a debt restructuring program. And I told you that my debt is in good standing. Yeah. Okay. So there may well be a reason why debt is not there, but debt should be there. It should spell out what is the allocation on debt, like any other budgetary allocation, like any other vote in the budget.
Okay, so let me ask the producer to go to the slide that deals with public debt, and that should be around, right, so public debt developments. Mr. Speaker, significant progress was made in reducing Grenada's debt vulnerabilities and in regaining international credit worthiness. Our public debt to GDP ratio fell from 108% in 2013 to under 60% at the end of last year. And it goes on to say there will be a spike in our debt to GDP ratio by approximately 13% to an estimated 69% of GDP. So, Mr. Burke, while you're on that subject, you want to pick this up here?
Yes, well, the spike is quite obvious. If your GDP has fallen by the projected 12%, and even though debt remains constant, then you must have an increase in the debt to GDP ratio. I think this is mathematically simple to follow, that the base has contracted, the numerator remains the same or even might increase, then it will increase, then the overall debt to GDP ratio will increase. But I take, I was listening to Lennox Monday night when he said that the debt to GDP ratio will even exceed 100%, and I challenge that. I doubt that, and I see no mathematical or financial evidence to indicate such will happen, and there are a number of reasons why. The former Minister of Finance is on the program, and he knows very well that the debt to GDP ratio in 2013 exceeded 100% because the primary source of borrowing was short-term, high interest, and it was used primarily to finance current expenditure, which is a no-no in economics. Yeah, this has not happened under this administration, and it will not happen going forward.
All right, so let me go back.
It will not exceed that. It will not exceed that. It will not exceed 100% for two basic reasons. One, when you look at the source of financing of the capital expenditure, it is primarily soft loans and grants. Yeah, and if you have soft loans or if you have grant will not increase your debt. And at the same time, if we accept the basic philosophy that there's a functional relationship between increased investment and output or growth, that if you increase your borrowings to invest in the PSIP, then there will be a commensurate or even higher level of output, yeah, to compensate for the increase in debt. So in moving forward, I do not see any kind of acceleration of the debt to GDP ratio at all for those two factors and others I could mention.
So, Mr. Boatswain, can I ask a question, please? I hope you have the numbers to tell us. The question that was being raised, I believe, by Mr. Andrews was that of, or it could have been Mr. Burke, exactly how much money is going toward debt servicing? The document was presented to all of us very late, so I didn't have time.
I thought there was an amortization figure in the budget, in the budget presentation, so I'm really looking for it. But that should be there if it's not there. We must know the allocation for amortization or the repayment of the debt.
Right.
It must be there. So I'll have to look for it.
So Ms. Campbell, if I can come in here. Right. Now,
when you're done, I will answer the question that you asked me to answer, Mr. Campbell.
Sure.
Yeah. So if I can come in here, when you take a loan, right, and you have to repay it, you are in fact repaying back two things of the loan. You're paying back interest and you're paying back amortization or principal repayment. You're paying back what you borrow plus you're paying back interest, those two things. The interest payment on the loan is recorded above the line as interest payment. But the principal repayment, which is money you have to collect to pay, is recorded below the line as a financing item, right? Now, when I look at the abstract of recurrent expenditure, our interest payment in 2021, which is both domestic and external, amounts to 63 million. Our principal repayment in 2021 amounts to 296 million, right? So when you add these two together, you're well over 300 million that you have to pay for debt servicing alone. So in terms of allocation of expenditure, the truth is that, and the point that Mr. Burke was making, is that your debt servicing allocation really to represent the highest allocation in your budget. But of course, this is not shown. It is not shown up there. Now, as regards the increase in the debt stock, in 2021, you are drawing down loans of 44 million. You are drawing down loans of 44 million. That is only the central government loan. Good. But apart from the central government, the total consolidated public sector, they too also taking loans. So, and if they fail to meet their financial commitment on time, then it is the government who has to intercede and pay. So, for example, the loan for the airport reconstruction or the airport expansion, good. While it is a statutory body loan, it could well end up being a central government loan. But in any case, whenever you're doing the debt, you don't only look at the central government debt, you look at the consolidated public sector debt, which consists of both the central government and the statutory bodies. And the point I was trying to make on Monday is that if you consider the total debt of the country, domestic, external, central, and statutory body, the total consolidated debt, it is likely that the debt to GDP ratio can well go above the 100%. That's the point I was making.
Okay, so let me ask, Mr. Burke, you said that there was a point you wanted to come back in on. Go ahead.
Well, yes, there are a couple of things. First of all, let me just add to what Mr. Andrews just mentioned, that in fact, when you really think of it, the government owes us a duty to tell us what is the budgetary allocation on the debt. That should be in that same paragraph with all the allocations. So Mr. Boatswain may have to explain to the public, or Mr. Bowen, why that is missing. Do not leave those numbers out, because the entire picture should be painted. Yes. The second thing that must be said is it is not true to say that, debt to GDP ratio has not gone past 100%. It has gone as high as 127%, the highest in the history of the country. And the IMF figures will show that back in 2008, yeah? And before, 2007, 2008. The other thing that I think is important to mention here is that, whenever you look at that debt situation, you cannot. Mr. Boatswain is right. You're looking at a fraction. You have a numerator and a denominator. The numerator is just the debt itself. So when the government borrows $165 million from the Chinese for the purposes of the airport, it increases the numerator. When the government incurs a debt of $200 million to Grenlick, it increases the numerator. When the government says that we are going to borrow $300 million to finance this budget, it increases the numerator. So if the top is swelling and the bottom, which is the GDP, the growth, in a crisis, remember, this has shrunk. Because of COVID, the denominator has shrunk. It has gotten smaller. And the debt is ballooning and going up. The top is widening, which essentially means that that fraction must increase in size. The ratio must change. And we cannot predict. If we don't know what the debt itself is, then we cannot predict what the debt to GDP ratio is going to be. So I think it's very important that those numbers be made available. And I don't know, for example, whether the government, it doesn't matter too much, because the government will, in the end, have to satisfy this airport debt, whether the airport authority can pay or not. I don't know whether they guaranteed the loan, but the bottom line is that's part of the national debt. And the debt to GDP ratio will rise. I can't say whether it's going to be 100 or not. I'm not prepared to say that, but it will increase. I think that is reasonable to assume.
All right, so Mr. Boatswain,
you asked a question on the infrastructure. You asked me why was the infrastructure allocation one of the greater ones, and that's the question I was hoping I can answer.
Okay, go ahead. I wanted to go back to Mr. Boatswain on a matter, but go ahead, Mr.
You can. I will make the point later on if
okay,
it's okay.
Good. Mr. Boatswain, you said you were looking for some numbers. Have you found them?
Yeah, clarification. As I said, I was looking for the number in terms of amortization for 2021, but if we can use 2020 figure as a proxy, yeah, and I doubt there will be any significant variation because these are statutory payments. And you're looking at $287 billion as the amortization of debt repayment for 2020. So I do not see any significant deviation from this. I want to correct Brother Naz in terms of the airport debt. That cannot, and let us be realistic, that cannot enter as part of central government debt at this point in time, because the airport authority is contractually bound to repay. And in the event of default, then it becomes a liability of the government. So we cannot say at this point in time that it is part of the public debt. When the responsibility is up to the airport authority to repay. And I'm quite sure that when the loan was negotiated, I mean, there must be a sovereign guarantee. That's quite obvious. You as former finance minister, you know that. You do not enter those as part of your central debt at that point. Yeah. When that was entered into, I'm quite sure that both the lender and the borrower sat down with the airport authority and look at the financials, look at the projected financial statement over the next 5 to 10 years, because the loan is not due to be repaid until the next 5 years, right? So that is when you have to look at the possibility. Will the airport authority have the capacity to repay the loan then. And knowing the Exim Bank of China, they do not just give you money because they want to give you money. They want to make sure that your financials are good. And quite obviously, they would have looked at the projected financial operations of the airport and say, yes, we believe that based on all the variables and all the factors that could influence higher earnings in the future, we can give that loan. But in the event of a default, then it becomes part of government's central debt.
Mr. Boatswain, I hope you're right. That's all I would say. I hope you're right.
I am right.
But there's a point I want to make about debt and solving our debt problem. I get in a sense that in certain circles, the view is that to solve your debt problem, you must take more debt. You know, you must borrow yourself out of debt in order to solve a debt problem. And I'm saying no. Right? And Mr. Burke explained, it's a numerator over denominator. So to solve your debt problem, what you have to do is to raise your GDP, increase the denominator, and try and keep the numerator as small as possible. Yeah? So in other words, for every $1 you get, you're getting GDP, you get a very small amount in debt. And unless, therefore, we take time off and think about how we should go about growing our GDP. And here again, I give focus to agriculture because agriculture is one sector that could help us to grow our GDP. Put more money into the agriculture, grow the GDP, grow the denominator without even having to borrow substantially and solve the debt problem. So the solution really is in GDP, not in taking more loans.
So the solution is in the solution.
So can I just quickly respond to that fallacy?
Wait,
because I think my good friend is making a serious blunder.
Wait, hold on.
And I think we have to.
We will correct that, Mr. Boatswain. However, it is 9:29. We must take a commercial break. We have not taken one for the night.
Yes, but I want to correct that fallacy when we return.
Come right back. The fallacy to be corrected by Mr. Boatswain when we return on Beyond the Headlines.
You can gift yourself with a chance to win the Lotto jackpot. Now, imagine winning the National Lotteries Authority jackpot of $64,000. Why pass upon this winning opportunity? Lotto, play and win a lot of money.
A pleasant evening to everyone. Welcome to the National Lotteries Authority's Lotto Draw number 3147 for today, Wednesday, December 2nd, 2020. I am Anisha Charles. With me this evening is Ms. Makiba Bain from PKF Accountants and Business Advisors, whose purpose is to ensure that this show is conducted in an accountable manner, and the game balls with industry standards and in a way tampered with. At this time, you should have tickets at hand because we're about to play for a jackpot of $64,000. But first, your free ticket letter. Good luck. Your free ticket letter for this evening is Sugar Tickets. Your free ticket letter for this evening is E as in even. Let's proceed for 5 running numbers. Good luck. First number this evening is Sugar Tickets in the meantime. First number is 20. Second number. Second number is 10. Third number. Third number is 24. Followed by 11, fifth and final number. Final number is 30. Let's recap those numbers. Check your tickets. First number up is 20. The second, 10. Third, 24. Followed by 11. Fifth and final is 30. So that's 20, 20, 10, 24, 24, 11, and 30, 30. Your free ticket letter for this evening is E as in even. Congratulations to all the winners of this evening's Lotto Draw. Lotto, play and win a lot. When you play all the games of the National Lotteries Authority, support sports, culture, and the nation building. Thanks for joining us. Have a wonderful evening.
By now, you should know that the early bird catches the worm. So, what are you waiting for? Put wings to your feet and head to your nearest scratch seller. For every quick sevens scratch ticket you buy at $2, the NLA gives you 7 chances at winning as much as $7,000. Scratch the entire play area for your 7 chances at revealing as much sevens and win the corresponding prizes. Win easy with Scratch. Must be 18 or older to play.
And welcome back to Beyond the Headlines, a special edition this evening as we review the 2021 budget as presented today in Parliament by Finance Minister, the Honourable Gregory Boatswain. This evening, our panelists are 3 distinguished men in finance. We have 2 former finance ministers with us, Mr. Nazim Burke and Mr. Anthony Boatswain, who is the chairman of the New National Party. And we have economist Mr. Lennox Andrews, who was giving kudos to 2 of his colleagues he worked under, both in the Ministry of Finance. And before we went to the break, Mr. Boatswain said he needed to correct a fallacy. The correction tape is handed to you, Mr. Boatswain. Let's work it.
Right. I think Mr. Andrews, as a student of economics, is quite familiar with the production function. I don't want to sound like a school teacher, but the Keynesian production function where Y output equal to C plus I plus V plus X minus L. We are familiar with that.
Mr. Boatswain,
if you want to increase the output,
somebody sent a message on here asking that you gentlemen speak in layman terms. That's something somebody said.
If you want to increase your output, as you rightly said, you have to expand your public sector investment program, especially when the private sector is not as responsive. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with a country borrowing, especially on concessionary terms, to finance its PSIP. Because as I said before, there's a functional relationship between expanding your PSIP and expanding employment and output. And that is prescribed by that matrix, your incremental capital output ratio, right? So you cannot say on one hand that, okay, we need to expand your PSIP. What is the source? You need to invest, you want to increase production in agriculture, but you must invest. And you could invest under the present circumstances only by borrowing where you do not have the resources as it stands right now. So there's absolutely nothing wrong. Concessionary borrowing to finance your PSIP, to expand your output and employment is good economics. It is only when you borrow on what you call non-concessionary terms or high interest borrowing to finance consumption or to finance recurrent expenditure, you're looking for trouble. That's poor economic policy. And you will never see this administration engaging in any type of borrowing to finance current expenditure. But there's absolutely nothing wrong, and you know that as an economist, that in the circumstances where you have no recourse to any other source of financing, borrowing is what you have to do.
All right. So let me come in here,
because certainly what I said was no fallacy at all. No fallacy at all. In the first instance, you do not necessarily have to borrow to finance your public sector investment program. If you have a sufficiently large current account surplus, which we don't have. Listen to what I'm saying. This is what I'm saying. If you have a sufficiently large current account surplus, then that current account surplus can in fact finance your capital program.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely. That's your first source.
Right. If you could get sufficient grants, right, you could also use that and your current account surplus to finance your capital program.
But there's no guarantee for that. That is good as well.
So that's fine. So the point I'm making is this. At the end of the day, you have to make sure that your PSIP goes really and truly into productive sectors that could cause the GDP to grow.
Absolutely correct.
Right?
Absolutely correct.
So I'm not saying anything wrong. All I'm saying is that 2/12 is 1/6. But 4/12 Boatswain.
All right,
It's 1 over 3.
Let's not get too bogged down in technicalities. But
No,
I
it's not
think we
technicalities.
understand.
The point is that there's no fallacy in what I said.
What I'm saying,
Solution. And many discuss that in the issue many times.
In the absence of
less than mathematics, man.
in the absence of recurrent surplus, which is the issue of first recourse for financing, and in the absence of adequate grants, you look to concessionary borrowing.
Right.
Yeah, I'm saying there's nothing wrong with that.
So, and that's nothing. I accept that. Nothing is wrong with it. I accept that. But at the same time, no, we can't run yet. At the same time, what you want to make sure is that while you borrow, while the numerator is growing, you have to ensure that your denominator grows much faster than your numerator if you want the rest to come down. Good, we accept that.
Then that is the impact on growth.
Point accepted.
Correct.
Let's move on.
And Mr. Andrews, let me correct you there. Invariably, let me tell you why. Again, we might become technical because a lot of people don't understand. Invariably, the GDP will grow faster because the interplay of two forces at work with your incremental capital output ratio. And that is your investment multiplier and your consumption multiplier, which will ensure continuity or further expansion in your GDP.
Yeah, and that is the theory. That's the theory.
So, Mr. Producer,
well, I don't know what to base it on.
Continue. Producer,
let's move on.
Let's move on. Producer, let me ask us to go to another slide, and let's see what these gentlemen have been having this back and forth. So I've lost my train of thought for a minute. Let's see. So let's move to the other slide, Mr. Producer, and move on further. Right. So the outlook for 2021. The government is expecting overall growth of 6%.
Odette, we're not seeing the slide, right? Odette, we are not seeing the slide.
Right, so I'm reading it for you, Mr. Andrews. I'm reading it. The agriculture, construction, wholesale, and retail sectors will drive the recovery. So make some notes, Mr. Andrews. And if you have the budget document, it's under bullet point 6, outlook for 2021. We are projecting a return to positive economic growth in 2021. The agriculture, construction, wholesale, and retail sectors will drive the recovery. Other key sectors, including tourism and private tertiary education, are projected to recover much slower and will continue to affect the speed of our recovery. Overall growth of 6% is projected next year. Notwithstanding this relatively strong rebound in GDP, the nominal dollar value of national output in 2021 will be below pre-COVID levels. We project that the growth in revenues will remain flat next year, while some areas are expected to show modest increases. Many major tax types, including the corporate income tax and the personal income tax, will decline given that they are based on the 2020 economic performance. I want to come here to Mr. Nazim Burke because Mr. Andrews had addressed that issue at length. Mr. Burke, do you think that's a reasonable projection for 6% growth next year?
No, I think it is very ambitious. Coming out of the crisis, I mean, remember, this economy has effectively been shut down several months, yeah? People are just beginning to pick up the pieces. The economy is not even fully back up and running, yeah? And to suggest that next year we're going to realize a growth rate beyond what any year in the last 5 years, even if it is true that the economy has grown in 2013 and onwards, in no year, I believe, had they experienced a 6.6% growth. Yeah. So what we are saying is that we're going to see more economic activity next year than we have seen in any year since 2013 in terms of the rate of growth. And I don't know what is the basis for that suggestion. It is very optimistic. It suggests that this growth is going to come from agriculture, construction, and retail and wholesale activity. Now, what allows us to say that we are going to see this dramatic increase in agricultural activity? Is it because people are doing independent farming in order to, out of their own initiative, in order to boost food security, because coming out of COVID, we saw many more people planting stuff and so on. Is that the basis? What exactly are the areas in agriculture that will be the source of growth that the government has identified? Is it going to be agro-industries? Is it going to be cocoa and nutmegs? What exactly? Fruits and vegetables? What exactly explains this? Is there going to be a dramatic change in the government estates? Something has to explain this. We can't just say that. Where you're dealing with agriculture, that is itself susceptible to the vicissitudes of weather, precipitation, rain, natural disasters, and so on, I think we have to be very cautious about making these large projections in agriculture. Construction perhaps is more predictable. Again, I don't know how fast many of these projects may move. When a local person is building a house, no problem, they're building a house and they will try to do what they have to do. But we've seen that many of the large foreign projects do not move with the speed with which the government often believes that these projects are going to move. Sometimes we hear in 2015 that a big hotel project is going to start, and then we see nothing for the next 3 or 4 years. Yeah. So I don't share the view that 6.6% growth can be realized next year. It is not impossible, but I would suggest that it's highly unlikely.
All right. So, Mr. Boatswain, Mr. Burke was asking what's the basis for that projection. Can you explain?
Yes, I share, and I'm speaking purely from an economic perspective now. I share Brother Burke's position on this, that it is optimistic. 6% is optimistic, but not impossible. Optimistic because we still have to provide the kind of assumptions in terms of what will the situation be with this COVID? Will there be a continuation of the semi-lockdown? That is not clear. What will be the situation with SGU and the tourism sector, the two largest sectors that contribute to growth in the economy? Some clarification will have to be given in terms of the assumptions you make with regards to those sectors. Even if agriculture and infrastructure will now be the key areas of investment, as he rightly said, the response time in agriculture will not be as quick as, let us say, you put on a building. Agriculture will not, if you invest in agriculture now, do you not expect to get the kind of return immediately? And remember that agriculture contributes only 8% of your total GDP. Yeah, so it's not a large sector in terms of any increase will magnify in terms of the overall increase. So we have to take that into consideration. With regards to investment in the PSIP, I want to agree with those here, but I know that measures have been taken to address that issue. The implementation rate could be a debilitating factor. And when we look at the historical trend, we have seen an implementation rate that hovers around 50%. If this 6% is to be achieved, then there must be an increase in the implementation rate that will bring it to about 70%. And I know that the government has taken steps in terms of removing some of the bottlenecks, the manpower constraints, the technical constraints in the ministry to help facilitate the implementation of projects. So if that continues, and we have faster implementation, and then there is a gradual turnaround in the key sectors of tourism, and SGU becomes a prominent feature on the economic scene again, then it is not impossible that a 6% rate could be achieved.
All right, thanks.
But you also have another problem, Mr. Boatswain, if I may please, Madam Moderator.
Sure, go ahead.
You have another problem, and that is even in respect of the external sources of funding. In many instances, you need to have counterpart funding at the local level to be able to draw down on some foreign sources of funding, yeah? And given the difficulty that you now have with revenues locally and the challenges that you have, it may well be that even if funding is available from external sources, you may not be able to draw down for the purposes of some of the public sector investment projects. You may not be able to draw down if you cannot raise the local counterpart funding that is required. So it's not just a bottleneck in terms of human capacity, in terms of implementation, not just the bottleneck in terms of human capacity, but also in terms of the local component of the funding. So there are constraints that do not show up simply in the numbers that I think you ought to take into account when you
Yes, Naz, I agree with you on that, but let us look at the figures. In terms of the financing of the PSIP, you're looking at grants, and that is mainly from the National Transformation Fund. That's not money we have to go abroad and look for. That money resides locally. You're talking about $172 million will be financed from that fund. That 56% of your PSIP funding will be from the National Transformation Fund, that's grants. And the remaining 43.7% will be concessionary loans and grants received externally.
Right,
and
which
when
itself,
we look at sorry?
No, I'm saying which itself carries some risks, because although you have one source of financing, one source of financing accounting for 56% of the capital program, that source has two components. One component is the monies that are already there in the fund, and
Correct.
The other component are what you expect will be coming in next year. With COVID still a factor, and the uncertainties that you yourself have just mentioned, you really cannot say with certainty that those funds are going to be available.
Yeah, I agree. There must be some systemic risk in that as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have no problem with that. But in terms of the financing,
let's move on to
the concessionary loans, because of Grenada's good credit rating and Grenada's good economic and fiscal performance, we have had access to concessionary financing from a number of sources. So
right. Gentlemen,
I think we're not standing too badly on those issues.
Gentlemen, let's rest that point and let's move on to another slide, because it's already 10 minutes to 10 o'clock. Let's move on to the other slide, Mr. Producer. Thank you so much. Let's see what we have here. So the public debt development, let's go past that because we've dealt with that already. And then we have the issue of savings. And the government is saying that it will target specific areas for expenditure rationalization, which will save millions of dollars. It is, and Mr. Andrews, let me ask you to make some notes. Mr. Burke, please make some notes since you say you can't see the slide. A freeze on hiring in all truly vacant positions, approximately $11 million in savings. And Mr. Speaker, the Finance Minister made the point today, it is important to clarify that these are positions for which there are no substantive holders appointed by the Public Service Commission and no officers holding contracts, acting or serving probationary appointments against these positions. So the government is putting a freeze on hiring and it's expecting to save $11 million there. An overall 20% reduction in utilities, electricity, communication expenses, and water, approximately $6 million in savings, and a 75% reduction in overseas travel, $700,000 in savings. So let's go over that number again. Utilities saving $6 million, 75% reduction in overseas travel, approximately $700,000 in savings. And I want to go to Mr. Andrews to take us through discussions on that. So Mr. Andrews, we're saving $700,000 in overseas travel. Is that a point where, as a planner in the Ministry of Finance, you'll therefore say once COVID is over, we are going to not have those kinds of travels again?
Well, once COVID is over, we may need to do some traveling to negotiate external financing for the country's development. That is a strong likelihood. And that can cause the overseas travel bill to go up. Right? But the other issue is the freeze on hiring. Now, in the public service, there are some established permanent positions, right? In my humble view, I don't think that's a good decision at all. I think those positions should be filled, and because one of the reasons why what could be filled to really and truly improve efficiency of delivery of service in the public service. Good. Filling those positions also means that you're creating some additional jobs, yeah, which will increase people's income, which they would spend and help to stimulate demand and make some form of economic recovery, yeah. But those established positions that are not filled, I think the government should fill them because they are important for the efficient running of the public service and for the efficient delivery of the service in the public service. It could be one of the reasons why the PSIP is not being implemented at the rate that it should. It's because maybe some planning officers that you're supposed to hire, let's say, for example, in the Ministry of Communicational Works or in the Ministry of Agriculture, you don't have enough planning officers there. And if the position is allowed for 3 or 4 planning officers, you should fill them to provide a better service for the public service. Good. So I think it makes sense filling them for the point of view of providing the better service for the public service.
Mr. Andrews, can I ask you, as a permanent secretary in the Ministry of Finance, you no longer wear the hat, but let's just put it as a substantive hat on you. How do you foresee the government being able to save so much money on utilities? You continue to run the same number of buildings and even more. So how can we realize those savings there?
Utilities, well, it simply means that, for example, ensure that you take up your lights when you leave your place. Ensure that you cut off your computer and so on when you leave the place. All right. Try and reduce on your international calls, your telephone communication calls. Try and reduce on them as much as possible. Use more virtual, good, to reduce those kind of things. Yeah. Okay. In the case of goods and services, it's simply that try and reduce on the number of paper and stuff that you have been using on a daily basis. Try and be as virtual as possible in the carrying of your duties. But it is likely that you could have some savings if you become more virtual in your behavior. And at the end of the day, when you leave, make sure that the lights, your computer, all these things are turned off, because you can in fact incur substantial utility costs by leaving them on overnight.
All right, let's start sprinting toward the finish line. Producer, let's move on to the other slide to see if we can.
Can I please say something on this particular issue? Yeah.
Sure, Mr. Burke.
On the freezing of public servants, there's a little bit of confusion there, because if the government says that these positions are all vacant positions, it means that they are not filled at the moment, and no monies have been spent at the moment. That this $11 million will only be incurred if they fill the positions. So I am not quite sure it's a true saving as such, because no monies are lost, really. I mean, I understand the point that is being made, but just remember, as long as nobody is there, the government was not spending any money on it, and therefore you're not saving any money, because you were not spending it. It is not a case where you were spending it and now you're not going to have to spend it. The positions are vacant, so that's exactly what they are. But I want to suggest also that even if the government were going to take a position not to fill some of these positions, perhaps it is not a good idea to simply take a carte blanche approach to saying, well, we're not filling any of the positions. It should be a more targeted, more purposeful, more purposive way to approach this. For example, let's say that there are 2 or 3 health workers among these vacant positions, health positions. In the context of COVID, filling these positions might be important, yeah? So we can't just say, well, as long as the positions are vacant, we're not filling them. I think there needs to be a much closer, much more careful, much more meticulous evaluation of the positions to make a determination, perhaps on a case-by-case basis, which positions are necessary, both for the purposes that we're talking about here and for the purposes that Mr. Andrews mentioned, which positions are necessary to enhance and to improve the efficiency of delivery in the public service and so on. Look at these things and make a more calculated, a more deliberate choice than simply a cut across the board.
All right.
Yeah, as far as the travel is concerned, I want to suggest also that as beautiful as it looks, this is more a matter of circumstance, yeah? COVID has shut down the country, nobody is traveling. So we will save money as long as nobody can travel. When the doors are open, when the stables are open, the story might be very different.
All right, let's move on to, I think we have about 3 more slides to go now. So we've looked at the escape clause, the government saying that it has again invoked the escape clause under the fiscal responsibility law. Minister Boatswain, what's going on here?
Well, quite obviously so. Remember that the fiscal responsibility law was passed to impose some level of discipline with regards to government's fiscal behavior. Yeah, and certain targets were set, which by law you should not violate. For example, the primary surplus. You're talking about you should not you should aim at something above, I think, 2 or 3% of your GDP. You're looking at your primary expenditure. That is to say, you should not spend more than 2% of your previous current spending. Yeah, you're talking about your wage bill should not exceed 9% of your GDP, and you're talking of your debt to GDP ratio, which should not, which should be targeted at, let us say, 56%. Although the ECCB benchmark is 60% by the year 2030. Because of the present situation where revenue has diminished and where growth has diminished, most of these targets have been breached. And to continue without going back to Parliament, as we have done, to ask for an extension or a waiver of those targets, we might be operating in violation of the law with regards to the debt to GDP ratio, the primary balance, and the current expenditure balance. So I think it is obvious that we have to take those measures to waive it. But what is important is that we cannot make this a permanent waiver, because we will be going back to the pre-2013 days, and we will be incurring the wrath of the international financial community. So this government has a responsibility within the shortest possible time to restore those targets, yeah, and to reenact the fiscal responsibility, the amendment to the fiscal responsibility clause to restore those targets to what they were before.
All right, thanks. I don't get a signal that the other two panelists want to weigh in on that. So let's go to another slide.
I do want to weigh in on it, please, Ms. Campbell.
Sure, Mr. Burke.
I agree generally with what Mr. Boatswain says, except for the starting point. The pre-2013 days, I would have gone back to the post-1995 days. Yeah, in other words, that's really where it began. So that's the only qualification I would make to that suggestion.
Political point.
I have no problem
Thank you
with
so
that.
much for that political interjection there, Mr. Burke. Let's go to another slide. Government has made an appeal to public sector trade unions regarding a deferral of negotiated salary increases for 2021, estimated to add $13.4 million to the wage bill. Further, government is appealing for restraint in making any demands for wage and salary increases in 2021. These measures could go a long way in helping to preserve jobs in both the public and the private sectors and in this extended period of economic uncertainty. Mr. Boatswain, we have already heard the teachers' union saying, no way, Jose.
Well, I see this as the most contentious and maybe the most destabilizing aspect of this budget. This whole issue of employee compensation. And this is something I think we have to give serious consideration to. In the present dispensation, I do not know how government could proceed and having to deal with issues like increase in salaries. I know that the 4% has been agreed to and government is obligated, but I believe government is approaching the teachers in a very amicable manner, given the present situation, that there should be some kind of agreement that you waive this 4% in the present circumstances. Not to do that will upset the entire budget. Let's be factual. And therefore, I believe in going forward, sober minds should meet. Now is not the time for any kind of hostile behavior on the part of either partners in this business. Now is the time for all social partners to come forward, see how we can deal with the situation that confronts us, understand the realities of the present day situation, and see how we can work this out. As I say, hostilities, confrontation will not work and it will not solve the problem. But this, to me, will be a contentious issue.
So,
and
Mr.
I'm pretty sure that
Mr. Boatswain,
the proper understanding of the situation, good sense will prevail on both sides.
so
and
Mr.
then we can
Boatswain,
reach an amicable solution. That, to me, is the most contentious and disturbing fact with regards to the soundness of this budget. Taking into consideration that you have other issues, such as the reduction of salaries, wages and pension and gratuity. All of these have to come into the mix. And will certainly impact the budget in a way that will be detrimental to all of us.
So you're saying that, you know, they should not be dealt with in a hostile manner, no hostilities, and there should be a coming together from both sides. So the teachers are saying, give us our docked wages and then we'll talk. What is your recommendation
as I say,
to government?
Common sense could prevail, I mean, and rational minds could meet. There's no problem that cannot be solved.
So you're prepared to tell
once we decide to take a rational approach, no problem is too great to solve.
And Minister Bowen give the teachers back the docked wages so that they could agree to waive the 4%.
I cannot speak to that. I cannot say that. I cannot say that on national television. That's not my remit. I'm just saying that both sides should meet, discuss, and let good sense prevail, given the present circumstances that exist.
But would
we are not living in normal times.
Do you think you could make it as a recommendation and not get your head chopped off?
What is the recommendation?
I'm asking whether you'd be prepared to make that recommendation without fear of getting your head chopped off, that the government should
what recommendation? I'm not too clear. In terms of what I just said?
Instead, the docked wages.
I am not speaking to docked wages. That's, as I said, that is not my remit. I cannot say what government should do. I'm saying both sides should meet and discuss the matter.
If you would be prepared to make a recommendation that the docked wages be returned without fear of getting a head chopped off.
No, I'm not. I am not prepared to make. The recommendation I'm prepared to make is that both sides meet and discuss the matter. Don't try to pin me down to anything that I don't want to get pinned down to.
Mr. Boatswain, like I tell everybody, I was asking you a genuine question, as my father taught me.
And I'm giving you a genuine answer.
Mr. Burke, you want to chime in on this?
May I suggest something, please, Madam Moderator?
Sure.
I hear Mr. Boatswain, and I think nobody can take issue with a statement which says, you know, that everybody should get together and talk and try to find an amicable way to solve a problem. I think it's commendable that he's taking this approach. And at the same time, I do believe that it's very important, as part in this environment in particular, that government itself shows the right, sends the right signals. Yeah, I'm not saying that they have the money, but send the right signals. What I'm thinking, for example, is this. Having read the budget statement today, I saw that the government plans to spend $3 million on restoring traffic lights, yeah? And a significant sum of money has already been spent hiring the traffic wardens, who I believe are doing a very good job. Many of them, you know, have been very helpful, and they're helping to ensure the flow of traffic, especially during the rush hours and so on, yeah? If I had $3 million to spend now, rather than considering that the wardens are there and are doing what they're doing and helping with the flow of traffic, if I had $3 million to spend when I had to choose between giving it to the teachers and restoring the traffic lights, I will give it to the teachers. Because I honestly do not believe that whether the traffic lights are working or not is going to make any significant difference in the flow of traffic in Grenada today. And I believe that with the help of a couple of wardens, the traffic can be regulated and directed quite freely, putting $3 million into the hands of the teachers, if that were the case, yeah? And because what it does is that it actually stimulates demand. It puts money in their hands, let them spend, which is what you want in an economic crisis. In an economic slowdown, you want to generate demand. You want people to be buying things. So put the monies in their hand and let them spend it. I am not making any judgment one way or another. I'm not saying that they should get their money or anything like that. I'm just saying the government has to send the right signals and show the right kind of prioritization. I would not spend that $3 million on fixing the traffic lights at this point.
Odette, Ms. Campbell, Mr. Burke is making a very good point, but not in terms of whether government should do this or not. The point I'm making is that these are some of the issues that both sides should sit down and discuss. I mean, nothing is cast in stone. Yeah, the government could give way on certain issues, while the teachers or the unions could give way on other issues. If that is an issue they feel that needs discussing, why not both sides sit and decide whether this is a priority at this point in time? I see nothing wrong with that. Government cannot take a strong-headed approach and say, yes, that is what I want to do, and I must do it regardless of what you think. I don't think this government is thinking that way. But that's why I say rational minds must sit and discuss and come up with solutions, because there's no problem that cannot be solved if we put our minds to it and be rational in our approach. But once you take a hardline approach that I want this and nothing else matters, you're going nowhere. Both sides have to give in.
Okay, great.
And
Mr. Andrews, I saw you nodding.
This street light is an issue, so be it.
Mr. Andrew, I saw you nodding just now. You want to chime in under like 30 seconds because we need to move on. It's already 7 minutes after.
I don't think that's a hostile issue, really. I wouldn't say that it's an issue of hostility that could create any major disruption in the economy. To me, that's a simple matter for negotiations. Yeah, and I think the teachers would let the teaching skills and knowledge prevail as with the government, and they will be able to come to a solution to this problem. But I heard Mr. Boatswain make reference to hostility. I don't say there's been any hostile activity at all.
All right. We would just want to go on to another slide. That one issue I think we didn't touch on based on the excerpts that we had. So let me ask the producer, Mr. Speaker. We note a point here that COVID-19 has laid bare social inequalities and exposed holes in our social safety nets, which have compounded gender disparities, women being disproportionately affected. And to help cushion the social impacts, government suspended the 2% increase in national insurance contributions, and the government also implemented a temporary unemployment benefit program. And it had projected to spend $10 million. During the period, a total of 3,303 people benefited, and that was broken down. 1,805, 1,805 women and 1,498 men received unemployment benefit. And I want to come to Mr. Andrews on that point. Mr. Andrews, we learned from the NIS today that they have extended it. So a lot of people were complaining at the outset that they set aside $10 million. We're paying people $300 a month, regardless of the threshold of their earnings. And people thought they should have enlarging the quantum, and now that we have seen the NIS apparently has $6 million remaining that was not spent. I hope I got it right. I think they spent $4 million and $6 million was not spent. Does that bear out people's school of thought that they should have increased the quantum?
The fundamental problem with these social programs is not so much the amount of money that you're spending on. The fundamental problem is the targeting. Is ensuring that those who are to receive the assistance, they get it, yeah, and that those who are not supposed to get it are getting it. That's the fundamental problem. Now, as long as we can do the means test and we can tell who in truth, in fact, have to get those assistance because they are really enough, that will be fine. But simultaneously, you do not want to put the NIS in a position where it cannot meet its basic payments. The basic pension payment it's supposed to make, it must meet that. Now, some years ago, the actuary did some studies and suggested that if some changes if some decisions are taken, chances are the NIS resources will be depleted. So while you want to make those expenditures, simultaneously, you want to also implement those policy measures that the actuary would have put in place to ensure that the NIS remain sustainable and viable and relevant. All right?
All right. Mr. Burke, you wanted to weigh in on that at all? Or no, we could cross?
No, I agree entirely with Mr. Andrew on.
All right, Mr. Boatswain, is there any plan probably to tweak the NIS unemployment benefit?
Not that I know of, and I do not want to speak on something that I'm not familiar with. Okay, but just to go back, with regards to what was said, the unemployment compensation, there is no clause in the NIS law to say that unemployment compensation is something payable. Huh? So let us look at what was done as a gratuitous payment, right? And therefore, we should not be looking at it, well, okay, it should be more, it should be less. It was a gratuitous payment, and not something that is enshrined in law that you must pay unemployment compensation. So
no, but having said that, Mr. Boatswain, I'm sorry. even though it is a gratuitous payment, there must still be an evaluation of its significance and its impact, its economic and social impact. In other
No
words,
problem at all.
if in the middle of an economic crisis, you're going to make a payment, some kind of stimulus payment or income support intervention, you want to know that it works. You want to know that it's effective. You want to know that it's fulfilling the objectives that you set out to do. So whether it's gratuitous or not, it's coming from the government. You know, that's the role of the government, to ensure that, you know, if you give me $150 a month, it may not do the trick. If you give me 200, it may do the trick. So I think it's important for people to say how they believe this is going to impact. It's not an act of ungratefulness to say, I don't think it's enough, you know. And I think it should be seen for what it is. It's income support in a crisis. So it may well be that a higher sum would have been more beneficial.
All right. Mr. Burke, we have a couple of suggestions on social media that the government ministers should take a salary cut in solidarity with the numerous workers who have been impacted by COVID-19. What's your thought here?
Were you speaking to me or
sorry,
Mr.
Boatswain, sorry. And he sits there and he's smiling and saying, let Odette make a fool of herself.
I was just about to say you're trying to get me in trouble, Mr.
Bungie, I am sorry, Mr. Boatswain, you could have helped me out there.
Mr. Boatswain, please.
Mr. Campbell, I'm not a minister of government, yeah? So, as I say, those in the fire, they feel the heat. Some of us believe that ministers making a lot of money, which I know for a fact that is not true, because I know that there are senior civil servants who are making much more than ministers, and their jobs are secure, and nobody asking them to take a cut. But a minister who is there temporarily at the pleasure of the electorate, after 5 years you're out, and when you're out, who employs you? Except you're a self-employed person as Mr. Burke. You could make a much more decent living being a lawyer than maybe being a minister. So, I mean, we have to be very careful when we make these kind of suggestions about take cuts, right? Very careful when we make such suggestions. It's an arbitrary request, and we must give it some more study before we make this kind of recommendation, because ministers do not make as much as you think, and maybe half of what they make, when their constituents come to them, they can't tell them no. And I'm pretty sure Nazim is familiar with that. That is why he will not tell you yes. So let's be careful.
Mr. Boatswain, how many terms can a parliamentarian serve before he collects a pension?
2 terms.
All right. And the teachers are saying, you know, that they can just work for, say, 8 years, 10 years and collect a pension, but their pension matter cannot be resolved. What's the juxtaposition here?
Well, I don't want to get into this kind of contentious issue. What teachers, what is rightfully theirs, they should get it. And let us not use what ministers get as a basis of comparison. I won't get into that. If they deserve, based on the work that they do, let them get it. And ministers should never be used as a basis of comparison in that regard. I made the point that many senior civil servants earning more than ministers, and they have security of tenure, which ministers do not have. And we never take that on board. We never take on board the fact that ministers' salary, half of it has to go to serving their constituents. Some people believe that ministers get in some kind of constituency allowance, which is totally untrue. They do not get any constituency allowance to help them help them service their constituents. So let us and look at the salary: $67,000 per minister, $80-something thousand for a senior civil servant. Let's be realistic about this thing.
So you're talking about security at tenure, and the teachers union has been complaining bitterly that teachers have not had security at tenure under the new contract system under which teachers are employed.
Well, if this is something that is mutually agreed to, I see no reason why. I know a lot of teachers were made permanent. Even when I was Minister for Education, over 500 teachers were made permanent. Yeah, so we cannot say that that has not happened, and this is the move, and that has continued, and this is the direction in which government is going. So, you know, we cannot make a broad statement and say they have not received security of tenure. That's not correct. Maybe some deserve it and they have not yet received it. And this is something maybe government need to sit down with the unions and say, hey, how do we go forward? Maybe that could be part of the overall package that they're looking at. Because we have to bring everything in the mix when we make decisions of this nature. Productivity, that's a serious problem. Nobody's talking about that. Nobody uses a productivity index to determine wage. We come and say, okay, I want X%, and yes, we negotiate. But what is the wage linked to?
Right. So as we wrap
what is it linked to? These are issues that both sides should sit down. I think we need a composite index. We have to look at a cost of living index, a productivity index, and maybe an affordability index to determine wage negotiation and wage increase as we move forward. And these are issues that should be brought on the table. But I'm not seeing any move towards those. Okay, but we still continue with those arbitrary approach to wage determination, which is not serving our country in the right manner. There are people who are working hard and they hardly get pay. And there are some who hardly work and they're getting more pay. These are issues that have to be addressed. But there seems to be deafening silence on those issues. In this new dispensation, I think both sides have to come forward and be bold enough to tackle those because it will impact both sides. But yet, there is this deafening silence on critical issues of this nature.
Right. So we're getting ready to wrap it up. We'll have our closing comments. But Mr. Burke, just before we leave this evening, there's a question for you. We have seen changes in the ranks of the National Democratic Congress, and Mrs. Franca Alexis Bernardine has resigned. And there has been some chirping of the birds in social media and other spheres that there could be a return of Nazim Burke as political leader in some leadership position of the NDC.
Is that a question or a statement?
It's a question, Mr. Burke. I know the deafening silence that Mr. Boatswain just alluded to.
Well, I don't know the answer to that question. At this point, I just want to say that, of course, we were saddened to learn that Franca's health had deteriorated, you know. She has been a wonderful contribution to the party over the years. Very solid sister. And we are saddened that her health is put in that position. But our health is first. And, you know, the party would miss her, but the party has to find someone who can pick up the pieces and move on. It's a well-established organization. It was formed in 1987. It's been around for a long time, 37 years. It has an institution. It has a good base of support. And it is one of the two major political parties. So I'm sure that it's sufficiently resilient to find someone to move forward. And I have faith in the future for the party.
And could that future leader be Nazim Burke?
Well, you know, I don't like to make pronouncements about this and that and never and so on. You know, if somebody had said to me that there would come a time in my life when I would see everybody in the world walking around with a mask in their face, I would say that's impossible. I don't know. At this particular point, there are no immediate plans.
If approached, would you lean towards saying yes, you'd ascend to the position of political leader?
I have answered you as best I could, Ms. Campbell. I don't want to say things I shouldn't say.
Mr. Boatswain, I see you smiling. You look as though you've been looking through the what do you call it again, the looking glass. You think you have an answer there?
I do not want to get involved in internal affairs of the NDC. They have the issues to solve. Mr. Burke may be in a better position to decide whether he wants to return to lead the party. He's shying away from it. But that's a decision for them to make.
Okay.
He has served his country in the past, and if there are those who believe that he could be up for a service, so be it. If there are those who believe that he should not, so be it. That's their decision. And I will not get involved as to whether they should move in the northern direction or southern direction or internally or externally. That is for them to deal with. All I know, the New National Party is a solid party, a united party, a party that has served this country in terms of crisis and in terms of prosperity, and we will continue to do that, notwithstanding what happened in the opposition camp. We are there to serve the people of Grenada, Carriacou, and Petite Martinique.
All right, let's get back on point. We've been dealing with the budget analysis, and we have in closing comments. Mr. Lennox Andrews, Economist, your closing thoughts this evening.
Well, my closing words are as follows. Come 2021, I would like to see a budget that is complete, which by this I mean the financing part of the budget. I would like to see it be part of the budget, explained in the budget as well. Because that part of the budget will tell you the real strength of the government's financial situation. Now, for example, when I looked at this budget this year, I noticed, for example, that the current account surplus of 23.9 million has not been factored into anything in the budget. That current account surplus of 23.9 million would normally go into the capital program, but there is no reference to it at all. And it is because all of the analyses that are supposed to be made in this budget were not totally made. So next year, what I'm looking forward to is to see a budget that was how it used to be done, 2011, 2010, and 2013, where you have three components of it. You have your revenue, you have your expenditure, and you have your financing. In other words, you have your above the line and you have your below the line. And that will give you a full analysis of the country's, of the government fiscal situation.
And Mr. Burke, your final thoughts this evening.
Yes, as I read the budget, I saw that the minister had three urgent priorities. One was restoring hope and supporting the economic recovery. The second one was to continue to push ahead with the efforts to modernize and transform the economy to meet the new demands of the dynamic global landscape. And the third was to continue to strengthen community level and nationwide resilience to various shocks, be they economic, environmental, or shocks to the health and education sectors. I identify with those three priorities. I believe that that is what is needed at this particular point in time. What was missing from the budget, in my view, was the second component. Those projects and programs, those activities, and the funding of those that would continue to push ahead with efforts to modernize and transform the economy to meet the demands of the new dynamic global landscape. That's why I began by saying I found that the budget was rather routine, was in many respects a very ordinary budget for a very extraordinary time, you know, and I think what we need to see is measures that take account of the fact that, you know, to succeed, to have a sustainable, successful development agenda, you must find a way to be competitive in the global economy, find a way to benefit from the global economy, to be integrated in the global economy. And right now we are very much on the side, doing the little things that we need to do to keep us alive. I want to see the second component addressed in future budgets. It's extremely important.
And Mr. Boatswain, your final words this evening?
Yes, my final word, I would like to end as I started, as it was in the end, so shall it be in the beginning, by saying that this budget was a very good budget, I must indeed say. It is a realistic budget because it reflects current realities, and that you must take that into consideration when you prepare a budget. It is a budget of hope, a budget that brings hope to the hopeless. It is indeed a recovery budget because we have seen in the budget a number of initiatives that will move our country and our economy out of the present situation created by COVID-19, where our major sectors have been depressed. It is a budget of transformation because in moving forward, I do not see us returning to the status quo pre-COVID. COVID has presented certain challenges which mandate that things cannot be the same as we go forward as they were in the past. It is a budget that reflects the need for resilience in all aspects of our lives, whether it's health, the economy, infrastructure, because it is only by building such resilient barriers that we can protect ourselves, not only from natural disasters, but from human disasters as well. And therefore, I wish to commend the Minister for Finance for presenting this budget, the staff of the Ministry of Finance, and to commend the Prime Minister for the vision that he gave in providing oversight for the preparation and presentation of a budget that I do believe the wide cross-section of Grenada, social partners will come on board. And notwithstanding our political differences, let us work together to ensure we build back a stronger and better Grenada. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And this is where we bring the curtains down on tonight's special edition of Beyond the Headlines, where we have been looking at the 2021 budget, which was presented today in Parliament by the Minister for Finance, the Honourable Gregory Bowen. Our panelists this evening, we've had two former finance ministers, Mr. Nazim Burke under the NDC and Mr. Anthony Boatswain under the New National Party. He is now the chairman of the New National Party and represented the government this evening. And we've had Economist, Mr. Lennox Andrews, and Mr. Andrews did serve as permanent secretary in the Ministry of Finance under both gentlemen, and he was saluting his bosses, so to speak, this evening. Gentlemen, you have been a good sport. You have helped to flesh out a lot of things which the public will not be able to glean from the presentation, and you helped to dissect a lot of issues. It's very enlightening, and I just want to thank you sincerely for agreeing to do this. Some people don't like coming on a program like this shortly after the budget is presented because they've not had time to dissect it, but I just want to thank you sincerely for agreeing to come along and assisting the Grenadian public in getting into some of the numbers. And to you, our loyal viewers and listeners, I want to say a very special thank you for being so keen this evening. And to those of you who did give your feedback on social media, we thank you so much. We'll see you again on Monday. Of course, we can't leave without thanking the production team at the GBN, General McDonald, who so graciously sourced our panelists for us, and Mike Alexis and others on the production side. Timon has been there, Parrot in Master Control, and to all of our associate producers, News and Current Affairs. God bless you. We'll see you again on Monday. I'm Odette Campbell. Thanks, gentlemen, again.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's new, innovative and classy, and it cut above the rest. Your one-stop shop for bathtubs, kitchenette, customized doors and windows, and even a new paint job. We also sell quartz and solid surface countertops. At Eminent Hardware, we offer best prices, excellent service, efficiency, and reliability. Visit us at